Someone gives an answer, confident, certain. Then the room disagrees, every single voice, and in half a second, the answer changes. No hesitation explained, no context given, just a mind folding. What if that isn't a flaw unique to human nature? What if it's something that happens to any mind built to weigh disagreement, including one we only just built ourselves? That's the question this documentary is going to answer. In 1951, a psychologist named Solomon Asch wanted to know something simple. Would a person say something they knew was false just to match everyone else in the room? He built an experiment to find out, and the results ended up defining social psychology for decades. It's still taught in nearly every introductory psychology class today. The task looked almost too simple to be a real experiment. Nothing about it hinted at what it was actually designed to measure. Look at one line, then pick which of three others matched it in length. The correct answer wasn't subtle. It was obvious, immediately, to anyone paying attention. But there was a catch. Every other person in that room already knew what answer to give, because they weren't real participants at all. They were working with Asch, and they'd agreed in advance to give the same wrong answer.
When the results came in, they were hard to dismiss. On average, people gave the wrong answer, an answer they could see was wrong, on about a third of those trials. And 3 out of every 4 people caved at least once, even if just for a moment. It became one of the most cited findings in the history of the field. Afterward, Asch asked them why. Most said the same thing. They knew their answer was incorrect. They said it anyway because standing alone against a unanimous group felt worse than simply being wrong. He kept testing the pressure itself. Add a second person agreeing with the wrong answer, and conformity barely moved. Add a third, and it jumped to nearly the same level as 7, meaning it doesn't take a crowd to change what someone is willing to say out loud. But one thing broke the spell almost completely. The moment a single other voice disagreed with the group too, even if that voice was also wrong, conformity collapsed. Not because the truth reappeared, because the group stopped being unanimous. Even a wrong but different voice was enough to restore a person's confidence in their own eyes. That's the human story, tested and retested for nearly 70 years. But recently, researchers ran a strikingly similar test on something that has never felt embarrassed, never wanted to belong, and has no group to go home to afterward.
In late 2025, 2 researchers built networks of AI language models and gave each one an opinion to hold. Then they told each model, in plain language, what percentage of its simulated peers disagreed and asked for a final answer. The setup echoed Asch's line task in spirit. State a position, learn that your peers disagree, answer again. They ran this thousands of times across different models, different topics, and different framings, building a detailed map of exactly how much disagreement it takes before an AI changes its mind. When they plotted the results, a familiar shape appeared. Stable at low pressure, a sharp shift once disagreement crossed a certain point, then leveling off. It's the same S-shaped curve researchers have documented in human conformity for decades, just showing up somewhere new. But not every model folded the same way. One required more than 70% of its simulated peers to disagree before it budged at all. Another changed its answer the moment it faced just a dissenting minority, no supermajority required. That's a striking difference for 2 systems built to do fundamentally similar work. And direction mattered enormously. For some kinds of statements, talking a model out of agreeing was almost effortless, but talking it into agreeing from a negative starting point took overwhelming disagreement. For other kinds of statements, that pattern flipped completely.
The researchers pointed to something familiar in that pattern, a bias well documented in humans, where negative pressure tends to carry more psychological weight than positive pressure. Bad information sticks. Good information has to work harder to land. Nobody programmed this response in deliberately. It emerged from training on enormous amounts of human-written language, and even the researchers who found it aren't entirely sure why it takes the specific shape it does. That's an unusual thing to admit in a field that often overclaims. Which raises the real question underneath all of this. Maybe conformity was never a personality weakness unique to people. Maybe it's what happens to any system, biological or artificial, that's built to take disagreement seriously and has to decide what to do with it. That reframing changes how we should think about every unanimous decision we've ever trusted. And that question isn't abstract. Right now, most of us live inside systems specifically designed to constantly show us what everyone else already thinks. Feeds, comment counts, trending pages, all built to broadcast the crowd's answer before we formed our own. Now add AI systems into that same environment, increasingly talking to each other, negotiating, moderating, forming their own version of consensus. If they respond to disagreement the way this study suggests, that stops being a lab curiosity and starts shaping outcomes at scale. That's not a hypothetical for some distant future. These systems are already being deployed today.
Here's what I'd take from this. Next time you see a consensus form, online, in a group chat, anywhere, the interesting question isn't just what everyone agreed on, it's what disagreement that agreement had to survive to get there. One caveat, because it matters. This is one study with one solid replication on a second model. It's a strong early signal, not a settled fact. Treat it the way good science asks to be treated. Promising and still being tested. That distinction matters more than ever in a media environment full of confident claims. Go back to that answer from the very beginning. Reverse to the instant it met disagreement. At this point, it could have come from either side of this story. And that's exactly the point. The line between what something actually believes and what it says just to avoid standing out alone just got harder to find. Not only for us, but for what we've built to think alongside us. And that uncertainty isn't going away. If anything, it's only going to grow. So think back to the last time you went quiet instead of disagreeing. Ask yourself honestly what it would have taken for you to speak up anyway. That number says more about you than you might expect.